Hello, speakers. If you don't know by now, Nier and Nier Automata are, by and large, my favorite video games. I have spent so much time on this channel talking about Nier and Nier Automata, and I'm still not finished, and who knows if I ever will be, to be quite frank. Having hung my hat so heavily on the head of Nier, I feel as though I want to take some time, or haven't given myself the time, to actually express things that I find bad with the game, things that I'm frustrated with. And I just wanted to. I feel as though having extolled my love for these games and extolled their virtues so much that I've earned a little bit of expressing the frustrations that I have with the things that are legitimately frustrating. Now, I'm just talking about Nier Replicant because of the remaster coming out, and I'm sticking to that just because it's fresh on my mind. I don't really have any conscious memory of what I found very annoying or frustrating with Nier Automata, so I'm not going to speak on that. But I am going to start by sharing how I first got into Nier, and it's a story that I've told in small pieces before, but I'll just put it all out here for now, because it's relevant to the experience that I had that I'm going to talk about, which led me to these frustrations. My way of discovering the Nier franchise was completely disconnected. It was unrelated to the internet entirely. I was studying abroad in Tokyo, Japan, and my dorm was in an area called Soshigaya, and as I was heading home from the train station, there was a corner video store that was on the same street as my dorm. And so on occasion, I would go in there and just rummage through the bargain bin, the bargain movie bin, which had more than just movies. It was movies and music and games, and really they just put everything of every kind of medium in the same big bargain bin for people to figure it out on their own, which was kind of odd but also kind of charming because the area was pretty well to do, and to see just this ramshackle kind of box of get stuff for cheap was, I don't know, endearing. And I found Nier in that bargain bin, the original Japanese Nier Replicant, and that was, how do I say it? It was just different. It was a game I had never seen before, never heard of before, and as far as I knew, no one else around me knew of this game either. And I didn't even have a PlayStation 3 with me in Japan, nor did I buy one. I simply bought the game from the video store and sat on it until I returned home, returned to college the next semester, and played it then. Thank goodness PlayStation 3s weren't region locked, because I could play a Japanese-only game without, breaking everything. And in terms of sheer difficulty, this game was an exercise for me, because I was trying to play this game, the first time I'd ever attempted something like this, entirely in Japanese. There were no English subtitles, English text options that you could change to for that original Japanese release. It was a Japanese-only game. And struggling as I could to decipher what I could understand from kanji in the menu, and just matching symbols in order to progress certain sections of Nier Automata, sections that test your reading comprehension of all things. Nier Replicant left a serious impression on me, because I could basically only understand maybe a third of it while I was playing through, and yet the themes of language and how it relates to power, and how that power can be limiting, how a lack of understanding or a poor use of language can be limiting to a person's experience, still showed through to me. And when I loaded up New Game Plus and went all the way through Kaine's story as best I could, I thought that was it. I didn't really experience anything of the sympathetic route B where you could understand what the monsters were saying. I didn't know it was a thing until years later. I'm watching a Let's Play channel, the two best friends play through the original Nier Gestalt, the English version, and discovered a whole new dimension to the story that I had never experienced either. And so I ended up purchasing Nier Gestalt in order to play through it all myself again in English, having now found out that the English side of things even existed as a sort of different experience, a different character. And I only played through the first playthrough of that, the Route A playthrough of Near Gestalt, never actually having to do the arduous tasks of certain side quests, certain mini games, and the weapon upgrading, because I simply watched the Let's Players do it. However, for the remaster, I have done everything myself, and that has resulted in some different feelings about how the game was constructed. I don't feel differently about the themes, but I do feel differently about a lot of the execution and a lot of the unnecessary fluff in that game that I can't chalk up to endearing jank. Like, the movement and the fighting of the original Nier was very much an endearing sort of jank. It worked, it was overpowered, the overpoweredness fit the themes. I liked that aspect. But I do have three things that essentially were just so frustrating to me, and still are a frustration, because one of them isn't even done yet. But here they are. No more stalling. So the first thing that bothers me is the fishing and the gardening mini games. For the love of God, they are so completely esoteric. There is a complete lack of information in terms of what you're actually supposed to do and where, and the amount of time investment for finding where you're supposed to go, whether or not you're using bait or whether or not you're using the lure. Thank God for wikis, because if I didn't have guides that I could look up, I would have just dropped it. And that, I guess, would have been fine, because the fishing and the gardening don't have any thematic relevance to the story either. It was so, how do I put this? Mini games like that, where the intention is to just sit back and relax and enjoy being in the world, are far more relevant to an open world, immersive experience type of game. Something like Skyrim, which came out only a year later, would be perfectly at home with mini games that are about gardening or fishing. This wasn't that kind of game. Nier is a story-focused game of thematically linked vignettes, and there really just wasn't a relevant story in the fishing or the gardening. Particularly, I'm talking about the fisherman's quest. I'm going to spoil it for you. He's a fisherman. He's a joking old man. He trains you. It's weird. And then you find out after he dies at the end that he was secretly an assassin the whole time in his past life. And that explains a lot of the jokes. And that was the story. That's not related to the themes of language, how language creates power, or how power limits your options and defines humanity through that limited language and those limited options. Completely unrelated. Then, in terms of the gardening, the one quest where you have to collect 10 pink moonflowers, and for the love of God, there's nothing to explain to you how cross-pollination works in that game, and that you're just supposed to experiment and figure it out. But that experimentation takes so much time, of real time, because the system uses the in-game clock in order to progress the time for how long your crops grow, and how long it takes them to die to harvest the cross-pollinated seeds, to then cross-pollinate it again between the indigo flower and the red flower to get the pink flower. And it's ridiculous, because the end of that quest is, oh, hey, great, thanks for the flowers, here's some money. It's honestly completely unnecessary. And while some people may find it quirky, I'm seriously saying, for the love of God, why do I have to wait 48 hours for this flower to die so I can collect its seeds to get a % chance of a cross-pollination with another flower, and wait another 48 hours for this plant to die so I can get its seeds so I can plant another plant and hope it comes out as pink? Why? It's so asinine to have that level of esoteric nonsense that are completely unrelated to the themes. I once said that Nier was a completely ludonarrative resonant game, and I have to walk that statement back, because it's not completely, it's just that those elements that are ludonarratively resonant are very much so, are very well realized, and then the stuff that isn't really really isn't. Which leads me to my second complaint, which are the structure and the design of the side quests. Again, people give a pass to Nier because it was an older game, but Nier is only 1 year older than Skyrim, and a lot of open world and fantasy games had learned a lot of lessons about how to create interesting and unique quest design. The fetch quest design of Nier was really just bare minimum. Get the things, go back and forth, keep going back and forth. And ultimately, the biggest, justification, the biggest apologetics for the side quest design being so simplistic and repetitive was that they were supposed to deliver on meaningful and impactful stories. But having just replayed through all of them, I can say that a very small portion of those side quests actually have thematically relevant stories that are relevant to the overall themes of the game. Maybe at most it's 1/10. At most 10% of the side quests have a story that makes it worth it, or have stories that are relevant to other stories that are the bigger, more important side quests of the game. But nothing has been more egregious than farming for all of the upgrade material to upgrade all of the weapons. I so love the idea of upgrading your weapons, and the weapons, the statistical upgrades for the RPG leading into being rewarded with story, which is one of the core engagements that people like me who play RPGs play those games for. That was an awkward phrasing, but we like to be rewarded with story, and story is usually rewarded when you beat the next thing and progress the story. Rewarding us with more story for simple statistical upgrades is an awesome idea, and it smacks of that Dark Souls-like item description means of delivering lore. Not that it's actually about lore in Nier, and I'll get to that in a moment. But as of last night, I fully upgraded all of the weapons for Nier Replicant, and I will be doing a Nier Replicant, weapon story review like I did for Nier Automata. But I have 82 hours of game time, of play time, put into Nier Replicant. And of those 82 hours, I would say about 35 of those hours were spent just farming for the rare resources. Just looping and looping until I got the number of rare resources that I needed. And it was arduous, and it wasn't fun, and it was ridiculous, and thank God I got so lucky in the moments that I got so lucky. A few times I walked into the Baron Temple and I got 3 pyrite. Sometimes I walked into, the very first time I walked into Seafront with the explicit intention of farming black pearls, I got 3 black pearls right away. The Forlorn Necklace and the Broken Earring alone took me maybe 10 hours to get the total amount I was needing. It was completely unnecessary to lock not only the weapon stories, but the final act of the game behind something so mind-numbingly tedious and thematically unrelated to the message of the game. And while I'm complaining about all these things for the original Nier, and for the remaster, because it is a faithful remaster, it stays true, I'm complaining about these things knowing that a lot of these issues are already fixed in Nier Automata, and that if there are future Nier games, and not just Nier expanded universe crossover promotions in other games, then these issues will probably be addressed as well, be more polished, more enjoyable to engage with, as opposed to feeling like drudgery. So to a certain extent, I'm beating the dead horse here, and I recognize that. But I think a lot of the problems with the things that I've had frustrations with come down to stuff being added to the video game, specifically because it's a video game and needs to behave like one, needs to have video gamey things in it, as opposed to using the game medium to deliver on the message of the piece of art. And I don't feel as though that is a pretentious statement in this case, because of the kind of writer that Yoko Taro is. Yes, he has a lot of fame for being quirky and weird and out there, but as he's described in some interviews, his writing style is a sort of working backwards kind of writing, where he picks the theme, the message that he wants to convey, and he starts building out how he's going to convey that message, and then finally interconnects it with the rest of other parts of stories that he's written, simply to draw connections, to bring the messages into communication with each other in an intuitive, sort of non-explicit way. Yoko Taro writes without regard to the plot or to how things actually interconnect, and that's part of why his settings are so far apart yet interrelated, because the relatedness isn't what's important for his writing. The end message guides all of what actually occurs in the stories. It's sort of the perfect expression, there again using highly complimentary words, and a very focused expression of soft world building, where the world is created not because it would make sense for the world to have these things result from the last thing that happened in the last story, but because Yoko Taro has a message he wants to share, and shares it by building a world that brings that message to reality. It's that classic filmmakers, I don't know what this movie is about, but I know how it ends kind of feeling. If you start with the end and you build everything towards it, you can have remarkable thematic consistency. And the main story, the main vignettes of how the game progresses, achieves that very successfully. And the side content, the stuff around it, more often than not doesn't. And given that Nier is basically my only dedicated fandom that I really am passionate about or express my passion for in a consistent and long-term way, I elected to suffer through all of the unnecessary side content. But dear God, the raw materials farming is necessary for the main content, and it's just terrible. It's so bad, and I don't like it. But it's done now, so hopefully, as I might have done for Nier Automata, I can forget about all of the frustrations and the bad things I experienced, and in a month or two, only remember all of the things that I liked, so that I can only talk its praises to anyone else who might be interested or anyone I talk to in the future. I'm very much looking forward to conveniently forgetting any bad feelings I have about Nier Replicant and getting other people to go through it so that they can suffer like I have. So there you go. それはそれで太郎さん。このゲームはひどい目にあって、それと私の一番好きなゲーム。ありがとうね。バイバイ。